A baby elephant is trapped in the middle of a dry riverbed. Above her, crows begin closing in as if they know what is coming before the rest of the world does. No mother, no herd, just heat, mud, and a calf far too small to survive on her own. But what makes this story unforgettable is not the way she was left behind. It is what happened next, when a stranger sat down beside her, and the herd came back. Because what followed did not feel like a rescue. It felt like a judgment from the wild. Dawn came slowly over Tarangire, not in a burst of light, but in a quiet unfurling of color across the dry Tanzanian sky. The first pale gold touched the tops of acacia trees, then spread over the grasslands in long, soft bands. From a distance, the elephant herd looked almost carved from shadow, moving in patient silence through the brittle remains of the dry season. At the back of that herd walked the smallest shape of all. Naya was only 5 weeks old, all oversized ears, uncertain knees, and restless curiosity. She had not yet learned the rhythm of the family's march, the invisible rule that kept calves tucked close and moving steady. Every few steps she drifted a little too wide, then hurried back with a clumsy burst of effort. Ruby, her mother, felt every one of those drifts before she saw them. She would glance back, low and measured, then slow just enough for the calf to find her place again beneath the shadow of her shoulder. Nia always did. She would press close for a few seconds, trunk lifted, comforted by the warm scent of dust, milk, and sun-baked skin, then wander half a step too far all over again. The herd was traveling toward a seasonal channel that still held moisture under its cracked surface, a place the older females remembered from harder years. The ground changed as they moved, from packed earth to pale dust, from pale dust to a crust of dried mud split into dark seams. To Nia, it all looked like one endless playground of smells, textures, and things that needed to be investigated. She paused at a bent tuft of green growing where nothing green should have survived. It rose from the edge of the dry wash like a secret, fresh and bright against the dead yellow plain. Nia reached for it with her small trunk and missed, then reached again, ears flapping with determination. Ahead of her, the herd kept moving, their footfalls low and dull, steady as a heartbeat, fading into distance. A pair of hornbills lifted from a nearby branch, with a rattling clatter that made her blink and turn. Then a vervet monkey barked somewhere in the thorn scrub. The world felt full and strange and interesting, and Nia drank it in the way only the very young can, with no sense that wonder and danger often live inches apart. She took one distracted step, then another, leaving the safer path the adults had chosen. The crust beneath her looked solid, sun-hardened and pale as old clay. It did not crack at first. It gave way all at once. One front foot punched through with a wet, sucking sound, and Nia lurched forward so suddenly that her chin dipped toward the ground. She yanked back in surprise, but the motion only shifted her weight. The second foot sank deeper than the first, and the hidden mud gripped her legs like hands closing tight. She let out a thin, startled cry, not yet fear, just confusion. Her body twisted as she tried to pull free, shoulders jerking, hind legs scrambling for leverage on the brittle edge. Chunks of crust snapped and slid into the hollow around her. The smell changed instantly, from warm dust and grass to something colder, mineral and trapped, rising from below like the breath of earth that had been waiting under the surface all along. By the time her second cry came, it had changed. It carried a sharper edge, a note that should have brought Ruby around at once. But the wind had shifted with the morning heat, pushing sound sideways across the wash. The herd was already slipping beyond a line of umbrella, acacias, their shapes breaking apart between branches and pale light. Nia could still see them, then only pieces of them, then almost nothing at all. She fought harder now, and the harder she fought, the worse the mud became. Each violent pull dragged her deeper to the knees. Her little body was not built for patience yet. It was built for reaching, for stumbling, for trying again immediately. Panic moved through her in waves she could not understand. Her ears snapped wide. Her trunk whipped the air. One hind foot skidded out, and she nearly went down. For a moment, she froze, breathing fast, eyes glossy and wide. Somewhere far ahead, Ruby stopped. One of the older females touched the matriarch's flank with her trunk, as if sensing the hesitation. The herd did not turn. Not yet. In the dry season, pauses happened often. Calves stumbled, adults adjusted. The line stretched and folded around obstacles. Nothing in that brief stillness warned them that one small life had fallen badly out of step. Above the wash, the morning seemed to dim. A moving shadow crossed the ground, then another. Nia lifted her head just as the first pied crow landed on the cracked rim a few yards away. It stood unnervingly still, black and white feathers stark against the dust, its head tilted as if listening. Then another dropped from a dead branch, and another, their arrivals so soft they felt less like flight than gathering. Nia answered them with another desperate cry, louder this time, raw enough to scrape her throat. The sound scattered across the empty channel and vanished into the widening day. The crows did not come closer yet. They only watched, and in that watching, in the way the sky above her slowly filled with dark wings circling tighter over the place where she was trapped, the morning lost its softness. Something had noticed she was alone. The crows did not rush her. That was what made them frightening. They moved with the patience of creatures that understood weakness better than mercy. One hopped along the rim of the dry wash, then stopped to study her. Another skimmed low enough for Nia to feel the air from its wings brush the soft edge of her ear. She jerked hard, and the mud seized her deeper. The sun climbed by inches, and with each inch, the world sharpened. The pale clay around her brightened to a hard, punishing white. Heat began to rise from the ground, as much as it fell from the sky. Nia's breathing turned ragged. She called again for Ruby, but the sound no longer had the force it had earlier. Fear had thinned it into something smaller, almost pleading. Above her, the circle tightened. More pied crows dropped from the acacias and dead branches that lined the wash. Some stayed overhead, crossing in black arcs against the broadening morning. Others settled close enough that Nia could hear their feet clicking softly on broken mud. They were not attacking. They were waiting, and somehow that waiting felt colder than violence. She tried to steady herself the way she had seen older calves do when crossing tricky ground. She planted her hind legs wider, lowered her head, and pulled one front leg with slow, shaking effort. For a heartbeat, it seemed to lift. Hope flashed through her body like a spark. Then the crust broke under her weight, and she slipped forward again, scraping one shoulder against the hardened edge of the wash. The sting startled her more than the pain itself. A thin line opened in the skin high on her shoulder, not deep, but enough for the smell of fresh blood to thread into the dust and mud. One of the crows snapped its head toward her at once. Another answered with a rough, rasping call. Nia froze, stunned by the new sensation, by the sudden knowledge that the world around her was listening to every sign of weakness. Somewhere far ahead, Ruby finally stopped for good. Her great head lifted, ears spread, trunk raised to sample the wind. The herd gathered around her in a slow ripple of concern. An older cow moved close to Ruby's side, while 2 yearlings pressed inward beneath the adults. They could not see Nia now. The wash and the acacia line had swallowed her. But absence had its own shape, and Ruby had begun to feel it. Nia did not know any of that. All she knew was that the place around her had turned strange. The herd was gone. The crows were near. The mud would not release her. She trumpeted again, louder than before, and the effort nearly took her down. Her hind legs slid on the broken clay, and her chest dropped low enough to brush the surface of the trap. The movement sent a tremor through her whole body. The crows reacted instantly. 3 burst upward from the rim, circling her head in a flurry of wings and harsh calls. Another dipped past her face so close that she flinched and swung her trunk blindly. She did not hit it. She only lost what little balance she had left. Mud sucked higher around one foreleg. Her ears flapped wildly, no longer curious, no longer playful, but driven by pure alarm. Panic, in a creature that young, had no shape and no limit. It was not strategy. It was a storm. Nia fought with everything she had, twisting, lunging, wrenching one way and then another, until her own strength began turning against her. The wash walls seemed to tilt. Light flashed too bright across her eyes. Her cries came broken now, each one shorter than the last, as if fear itself were outrunning her breath. At last, her legs gave way. Not all at once, but in a sequence of tiny failures. One knee folded, then the other. Her body lurched sideways, and she collapsed against the cracked mud with a dull, helpless force that knocked the air from her lungs. For a moment, she did not move at all. The crows fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pull back and wait. She lay there trembling, flank rising and falling too fast, trunk dragging a line through the dust. The sun pressed into her exposed side with brutal steadiness. Her eyes blinked slowly, then half closed. A young calf was not made to lie out in open heat without the shelter of her mother's body or the shade of the herd. The savannah could forgive many things, but weakness left uncovered was rarely one of them. One crow dropped down to the ground several yards away, then another. They formed a loose crescent around her, cautious but confident, black eyes fixed on the small elephant who no longer seemed able to stand. Nia lifted her head and tried to warn them off with a weak swing of her trunk. It fell short. The effort drained what little strength she had left, and her head lowered back to the mud. Far beyond the wash, Ruby made her choice. She turned so abruptly that dust rose around her feet. The herd shifted with her at once, every adult female swinging into motion with the hard, unified purpose of a family responding to one command. They began moving back toward the place they had left behind, not running yet, not fully, but no longer drifting with the morning. The line had become a search. Nia did not see them turn. She saw only the broken rim of the wash, the white blaze of daylight, and the crows standing closer now than before. Still, something in the air had changed. The silence after her collapse did not feel empty anymore. It felt suspended, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Her eyes stayed half open, fixed on the bright distance, while somewhere beyond it, unseen feet were beginning to come back for her. A few miles away, Ethan Cole stood beside a low bank of dry grass, adjusting a parabolic microphone toward a stand of acacias silvered by the morning sun. He had come to Tarangire to capture elephant infrasound, the hidden language that traveled through air and earth long before the human ear could notice anything at all. Most mornings began in stillness. This one did not. At first, the disturbance reached him in pieces. A burst of crow calls, too many and too concentrated to be random. Then a thin, ragged sound that rose and broke off so quickly it might have been mistaken for wind scraping through thorn branches. Ethan lowered the headphones from one ear and listened again, his body going still in the way it always did when instinct stepped in before thought. On the passenger side of the second vehicle, Lena Brooks was already checking batteries for the camera rig, her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled above the elbows against the heat. She noticed the change in Ethan's face before he said a word. He was not a man given to drama. If he froze, something was wrong. When he turned toward the wash country in the distance, she followed his line of sight without asking. "What is it?" she called, but his answer came half to himself. Too many crows, too tight a circle, too early in the day. He brought the binoculars up fast and scanned the pale breaks in the land where dry channels cut through the savanna. The first thing he found was motion overhead. The second was the shape beneath it, small, gray, low to the ground, wrong in a way that made his chest tighten. Lena was beside him in seconds, reaching for the binoculars the moment he lowered them. Through the glass, she saw the scene sharpen into something cruelly clear. A baby elephant trapped in the wash, dark birds gathering at the rim, the herd nowhere in sight. "We have to move," she said, already turning toward the truck. Ethan did not disagree, but he did not move at her speed either. He knew enough about wild elephants to fear the wrong kind of help. A separated calf could die in hours under a dry season sun, but touching it, lifting it, drenching it in human scent, could create a different disaster if the herd came back and found something altered. He had seen that logic ignored once before by a safari crew. That meant well. The reunion had ended in chaos, dust, and a mother's full charge. Lena was already in the driver's seat of the second vehicle when Ethan slid behind the wheel of his own. The engines came alive, almost. Together, two low growls breaking the morning stillness. Dust lifted behind them as they cut across the rough ground. Neither road nor track led where they were going. The land opened, dipped, and bucked beneath the tires, throwing light through the windshield in harsh flashes. The closer they got, the more the crows told the story. What had looked from a distance like a dark stain in the sky became a shifting wheel of black and white bodies, some circling, some dropping, some rising again, with irritated flaps as the vehicles approached. Lena leaned forward over the dash, camera forgotten in her lap now. "She's still alive," she said, not as a question, but as a plea. When Ethan crested the edge of the dry wash and finally saw the calf with his own eyes, the scale of her helplessness struck him harder than expected. She was smaller than he had imagined, her body folded awkwardly on one side, one shoulder smeared with mud and scored by a shallow scrape. Her ribs fluttered too, quickly. Her trunk twitched, then fell. Around her, the crows held their positions like patient witnesses. Ethan stopped farther back than Lena wanted. She threw open her door before the engine had fully settled. "Why are you stopping?" she snapped. "Because if there's a chance the herd is nearby, we do this carefully," he said, grabbing a field bottle and scanning the wash for tracks. The cracked mud around the calf showed signs of frantic struggling. Beyond that, almost lost in dust, he found the larger prints of the herd heading north. Lena looked from the tracks to the calf and back again, anger already rising from the kindest part of her. "Careful is how things die out here," she said. Ethan did not answer right away. He was looking past the wash now, beyond the crows, beyond the glaring line of acacias, listening with the intensity of someone trying to hear through sunlight. Nothing. No rumble, no breaking brush, no returning herd. Only heat and birds. He stepped, out at last, clapping once hard to drive the nearest crows up from the ground. They exploded into the air in a rush of wings, but they did not go far. Most settled in the dead branches above the wash, waiting. The calf lifted her head weakly at the sound. Her eyes were open, but only halfway. She was still in the world, but barely. Lena moved closer, then stopped when Ethan extended an arm to hold her back. "Give me 10 seconds, he said. He counted the calf's breaths, watched the tremor in her flank, noted the mud packed around both forelegs and the way her body had collapsed after prolonged exertion. She was not dying yet, but she was moving toward that cliff faster than either of them could afford. Lena saw the change in his face then, not panic, but decision. It was somehow more serious. He crouched low, speaking softly, even though the calf could not understand the words. "Easy now," he murmured, more for rhythm than meaning. Nia's trunk stirred and lifted an inch from the dust, sampling his scent before dropping again. That tiny movement pierced Lena more deeply than the larger signs of distress had. The calf looked impossibly young, not just vulnerable, but unfinished, as if she had not yet had time to become solid in the world. Behind them, another vehicle appeared through the dust plume, smaller and older, driving faster than the terrain allowed. It was Moses, a local ranger Ethan had radioed on instinct while crossing the grassland. He braked hard at the wash's edge and jumped out before the engine died. One look at the calf, one look at the crows, and his expression changed from urgency to something darker. "If the herd doesn't come back," he said quietly, "everything else will." For one suspended second, hope seemed simple. Nia was alive. 3 adults stood around her. Water, ropes, hands, effort. Those were things the human world understood. Lena moved first, already hauling a folded canvas drag sheet from the back of her vehicle. Moses grabbed a coil of recovery rope. Ethan stayed on the rim of the wash, eyes fixed on the calf, as if the most dangerous part had not begun yet, but was only now arriving. He slid down the cracked bank slowly, boots breaking through the brittle crust and exposing darker mud beneath. The heat gathered in the wash like trapped breath. Up close, Nia looked even younger than she had through binoculars, her skin still soft in the creases, her ears too large for her head, her fear too raw to hide. When Ethan crouched, she flinched without strength, trunk lifting weakly and then falling back against the clay. Lena knelt on Nia's other side and unscrewed a water bottle with shaking hands. "Just a little," Ethan warned. "Not on her face. Not yet." She nodded, though impatience flickered through every movement. A thin stream ran over the calf's shoulder and upper back, darkening the dust to a cooler gray. Nia's ears twitched once. It was a small response, But it landed, like a promise, and for a moment, all three adults leaned toward it. Moses looped the rope through the canvas and spread it under Nia's chest, as far as the mud would allow. "We lift with the body, not the legs," he said, voice clipped with practiced calm. Ethan moved to the front, one hand hovering near Nia's shoulder without quite touching. Lena pressed the edge of the sheet deeper into the mud. Together, they pulled. The canvas tightened. Nia let out a hoarse cry and thrashed once in blind confusion. The first attempt failed. Her body rose only an inch before the mud held her again. The second got one foreleg partly free, but the other slid deeper, twisting her sideways. Lena cursed under her breath. Moses reset the rope. Ethan kept speaking softly, not because words mattered to Nia, but because rhythm did. A steady voice could make human hands less frightening. The crows watched from above, silent now, as if even they understood the balance in that wash had shifted. On the third pull, something gave. Mud released with a wet tearing sound, and Nia lurched forward hard enough to nearly collapse again. Moses caught the tension in the rope. Lena dropped to her knees to support the canvas under the calf's chest. Ethan braced at the shoulder and guided her weight just enough to keep her from slamming down face first. For one wild, unsteady instant, all four of her legs found the ground at once. Nia stood. But standing was not the same as being safe. Her legs were spread too wide, her knees trembling, her head hanging low between her shoulders. Mud clung to both front legs in thick, dark bands. Her breathing was still too fast, each inhale shallow and sharp. Lena smiled anyway, bright with relief, and Moses let out the smallest exhale of victory. Even Ethan felt it, the human instinct to believe that getting something upright meant it was saved. Then Nia turned in a slow, wavering circle. It was not the searching turn of an animal checking its surroundings. It was the lost turn of something whose inner map had shattered. She faced north for a heartbeat, then west, then back toward the trap she had just escaped. Her trunk dragged low, not reading the air so much as reaching through it for something no longer there. Ethan saw the change before the others did. Her body was free. Her mind was still caught in the wash. "She doesn't know where they went," he said quietly. Lena looked at him as if the sentence itself were impossible. "Then we show her." She took 2 careful steps toward the herd's track line, clicking her tongue, calling softly, trying to coax Nia after her. For a moment, the calf seemed to notice. One ear lifted. She took a single step forward, then stopped, swayed, and turned away in a confused half-circle. Moses pointed toward the dusted prints leading out of the wash. "The herd passed that way. If she smells them, maybe." He didn't finish. Nia was already walking, but not toward the trail. She angled, back toward the broken patch of crust and sunken mud, the place that had terrified her, the place that had nearly buried her. Ethan moved fast enough to block her path without touching her. She halted, eyes wide, then pivoted and chose another wrong direction. The crows dropped lower again, perching on the acacias in a rough crescent above them. They had given up their place on the ground, but not their interest. Their black heads tilted with sharp, patient intelligence. Lena noticed them and looked away first, as if refusing to acknowledge what they represented. "No," she said under her breath, not to anyone there, but to the shape of failure pressing in from the edges of the morning. Ethan studied Nia the way he studied sound patterns, listening for structure beneath chaos. The calf was not simply disoriented. She was cycling, returning again and again to the last point her body understood. Trauma had narrowed her world to one terrible landmark. That was why the wash pulled at her, even now. It was the site of fear, but also the last place where the herd had still been real. Everything after it had turned to noise. Lena tried once more, gentler this time. She walked a few yards toward the northern tracks, then crouched and opened her hands, making herself small. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered. Naya looked at her, ears flicking, and took 2 uncertain steps. Hope rose too fast in Lena's face. It lasted all of 3 seconds. Then the calf's gaze glazed with confusion again, and she drifted sideways, circling back toward the dry wash as if drawn by a thread no one else could see. By the time the sun pushed higher over the acacias, the first rescue had already become something else. They had pulled Nia out of the mud, cooled her skin, and gotten her onto her feet. But the deeper danger had not moved at all. It had only changed shape. Around them, the savanna remained brutally beautiful. Gold grass trembling in the light, long shadows shrinking fast. And in the middle of all that brightness, one baby elephant stood free for the first time, and more lost than before. The sun rose into its full authority by late morning, flattening the world into glare. Heat shimmered above the dry wash in wavering sheets, bending the acacias and distant termite mounds into restless shapes. Nia stood near the broken edge of the trap, her sides pumping fast, ears flicking without rhythm now. She was out of the mud, but the fear inside her had not loosened. It had only learned how to move with her. Lena tried first because she could not bear not to. She walked a few yards along the herd's trail, then turned and crouched, palms open, voice low and warm. Nia looked at her, head tilted, as if something in the sound almost reached her. She took 3 small steps forward. Hope leaped into Lena's face too quickly. Then the calf stopped, swayed, and turned away again, pulled back toward the wash. Moses wiped dust from his mouth with the back of his hand and scanned the southern grass. "The longer she stays exposed, the worse this gets," he said. His tone was calm, but urgency had hardened underneath it. He had spent enough years in the bush to know how fast weakness became a signal. Quicker than people imagined. Quicker than mercy allowed. If hyenas crossed here last night, they'll check this wash again before dark. The crows seemed to understand the same math. They had gone quiet, which felt somehow worse than all their earlier noise. A half-dozen sat on low branches above the wash, still as carved things, their bodies angled toward Nia. 2 more hopped across the cracked mud nearby, measuring distance with every tilt of the head. They were no longer a storm. They were a clock, ticking in black feathers under the noon light. Ethan opened a hard case from the back of his vehicle and pulled out a field recorder, a compact speaker, and a pair of worn headphones. Lena watched him with disbelief. "You're not seriously thinking about sound right now?" He did not answer at once. He scrolled through labeled files: bull resonance, contact rumbles, calf reassurance, adult female assembly calls. Each one captured over months of patient listening. "She's lost the group," he said. "Maybe we can give her something familiar." The first recording rolled out across the wash as a low, velvet tremor more felt than heard. Nia froze, her ears spread wider. Her trunk lifted from the dust and hung in the air, sampling. For a few extraordinary seconds, her whole body seemed to gather itself around that sound. She took 2 steps toward the speaker, then a third, fragile and careful, as if crossing into a memory. Lena's breath caught. Even Moses leaned in. Then the recording ended. The silence that followed was crueler because it had briefly offered shape. Nia reached the speaker, found no body, no milk scent, no warm flank, no living answer. Her trunk brushed the metal casing, then recoiled. Confusion clouded her eyes again. She backed away, shaking her head once, hard. Ethan tried a second file, this one a softer maternal rumble, layered with calf contact notes. Nia responded faster, but worse. The false promise cut deeper now. She swung around in a tight circle, distress climbing all over again. Her movements lost what little steadiness they had. One hind leg slipped on loose clay, and she stumbled badly enough to scrape the same shoulder a second time. Lena killed the speaker with a sharp motion before Ethan could reach it. "You're making it worse," she snapped. "She hears a mother and finds a machine." Her voice cracked on the last word. Ethan did not argue because she was right. Not fully, not about the intent, but about the result. He had given the calf recognition without reunion, a doorway opening onto empty air. He crouched and looked at Nia as she stood trembling in the wash, trunk dragging low again. "I know," he said quietly. It was not apology, so much as defeat. Moses shifted his weight and glanced toward the horizon, then back at the sky. "Maybe we stop worrying about reunion and get her in the truck," Lena said. The sentence came out fast, built from fear more than anger. "We can follow the herd tracks, keep distance, let them see her. We're wasting time standing here while she cooks alive." She was already halfway turned toward the vehicle as she spoke, as if movement itself might force the right answer into existence. Her urgency filled the wash like another form of heat. Moses didn't dismiss it. "If you load her, you'll soak her in human scent," he said. "And if the mother comes in hot, that truck won't protect the calf." He looked to Ethan then, not because Ethan outranked him, but because decisions had begun settling around him, whether he wanted them or not. "If you leave her here, she may not last. If you move her wrong, the herd might reject her. Either way, you could lose her." That was the true cruelty of the hour. Not that there was no solution, but that every solution charged a different price. Nia took a few wandering steps toward the wash again, then stopped with her head lowered, as if even walking had become too complicated. Ethan noticed something then, a tremor in the skin along her flank, the way her tail hung without motion, the tiny lag in her response when a crow fluttered down to a lower branch. Exhaustion was moving in. Lena must have seen it too, because her anger drained all at once, leaving something more painful underneath. She crouched where she stood and pressed a fist to her mouth. For the first time since arriving, she was not trying to rescue the moment with action. She was simply watching a baby animal run out of ways to stay brave. When she looked up again, her eyes were wet, though her voice came out steady. "Tell me what still has a chance." Ethan looked at the tracks heading north, then at the speaker in the dust, then at the crows, then back to Nia. He thought about signal and noise, about the way animals returned to whatever felt most legible when the world became too much. The calf did not need more information. She had too much already. Heat, birds, pain, false sound, strangers, thirst. What she lacked was a point of calm, strong enough to cut through all of it. Before he could answer, a crackle broke over Moses's radio, then faded into static. He lifted it, turned, tried again, and got only fragments back from another ranger farther west. One phrase came through clearly enough to matter. Lioness, moving through Mopane Edge. Moses lowered the radio slowly. Nobody spoke for a second. The savanna around them seemed to sharpen all over again, every possible danger stepping half a pace closer without showing itself. The chapter of quick fixes ended there, under a sky gone white with heat. Sound had failed. Coaxing had failed. Logic had failed. The wash held its brightness, the crows held their watch, and Naya stood in the middle of it all with her small body quivering from spent fear. Ethan closed the recorder case and set it aside. Whatever came next, it would not come from another tool. It would have to come from somewhere quieter. Ethan did something that looked, at first, like surrender. He set the recorder down beside the closed case, removed the headphones from around his neck, and placed them carefully in the dust. Then he took off his gloves, slipped the radio from his belt, and handed it to Moses without a word. Lena watched him with open disbelief, as if she were seeing a man walk away from the only tools that made sense. "What are you doing?" she asked. He looked at Nia before he answered. Too much is coming at her. His voice was low, steady, almost swallowed by the heat. Every sound, every movement, every attempt to lead her somewhere she can't understand. We keep adding signals and expecting her to find the right one. He glanced toward the crows, then back to the trembling calf. She doesn't need more from us. She needs less. Lena opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Maybe it was the way Nia stood now, not even circling anymore, just swaying in place as if the world had become too loud to sort through. Maybe it was the failure of everything they had already tried, or maybe it was the change in Ethan himself. He no longer looked like a man searching for a method. He looked like a man listening for permission. Moses seemed to understand first. He took 2 slow steps back up the wash, radio hanging loose at his side, and stopped under a thorn tree where his shadow fell narrow and still. Lena hesitated longer. Her whole body resisted retreat. Finally, she backed away too, carrying the water bottle with her, careful now not to let it clink against the metal frame of the truck. The wash grew quieter with every foot of distance they put between themselves and the calf. Ethan stayed where he was for a moment, then lowered himself to the ground, not directly in front of Nia, not close enough to trap her. He sat a few feet off to one side, angled slightly away, knees bent, forearms resting loosely across them. He did not reach toward her. He did not call to her. He simply made himself small and still, as if he had decided to become part of the landscape rather than another force inside it. The silence that followed was not complete. Tarangire was never fully silent. Dry grass hissed under a faint breeze. Somewhere high in the acacias, one of the crows shifted its feet on the branch. A dove called once from far off, then stopped. But compared to the last hour, the wash had changed. The human urgency that had been thrumming through it was gone, and in its place came something wider, slower, almost breathable. Nia noticed the difference before she seemed to understand it. Her ears, which had been flicking in scattered bursts, settled into a weaker but steadier rhythm. She lifted her head and stared at Ethan for a long moment, eyes dark and glossy with fatigue. He did not return the stare. He kept his gaze low, soft, turned slightly toward the cracked ground between them. In the language of wild animals, direct attention could feel like pressure. He offered none. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then Nia took one step. It was so small that Lena almost missed it from the rim. The calf's right forefoot moved forward and set down with care, as if testing not the ground, but the air around the man sitting near her. She paused, breathing hard, trunk hanging. Then she took another step, and this one brought her clear of the place where the wash had held her. Dust stirred around her feet and settled again. Ethan stayed motionless. Sweat slipped down the side of his neck and vanished into his collar. A fly landed near his wrist. He let it stay. Naya closed half the distance between them and stopped. Her trunk lifted a few inches, trembling at the tip. She was scenting him now, drawing him in by fragments. The dust on his boots, the dry cotton of his shirt, the faint metallic trace left by equipment, and beneath all of it, the steadier thing she may have been reading without understanding. A body no longer demanding anything of her. The trunk reached farther. It brushed the back of Ethan's shoulder so lightly that Lena, watching from above, thought for a second she had imagined it. Then it moved again, tracing upward with delicate uncertainty through the short hair at the back of his neck. Ethan closed his eyes once, just once, then opened them and kept still. Naya's trunk lingered there, testing texture, heat, scent, the reality of a presence that did not push, did not pull, did not vanish like the sound from the speaker. When the trunk lowered, Nia took the final step on her own. Her small shoulder came against Ethan's back with hesitant weight, then leaned more fully as her legs softened under her. It was not a collapse. It was a choice. A young animal, half maddened by fear and heat and confusion, was placing part of her weight against the only thing in the wash that felt calm enough to trust. Lena brought a hand to her mouth and stood frozen, afraid even her breath might interrupt it. Moses looked up at the crows then, because he knew the bush well enough to notice what else had changed. They were still there, but their posture had shifted. The restless hopping, the low swoops, the clock-like impatience had gone out of them for the moment. They watched from the branches in unsettled silence, as if this new shape in the wash, a baby elephant leaning into a seated human, did not fit any outcome they had been waiting for. Nia stayed where she was. Her trunk slid once more across Ethan's shoulder and rested briefly near his upper arm. Her breathing was still too fast, but no longer breaking apart. There was a difference between terror and exhaustion, and another difference between exhaustion and surrender. What moved through the wash now was neither. It was the first fragile edge of regulation, the body remembering, little by little, that panic could loosen without death arriving in the same breath. Minutes passed that way, stretched and strange. The sun still burned above them. The heat had not eased. The herd had not returned. Nothing in the outer world had improved at all, and yet the center of the scene had changed completely. Naya was no longer spinning, no longer searching every direction and finding none of them safe. She had found a point to orient around, not because anyone led her there, but because stillness had finally made itself legible. Then, without warning, Moses turned his head toward the open plain. He did not speak at first. He just listened, one hand lifted slightly as if to hold the moment in place. Lena followed his gaze toward the far shimmer where the land blurred into light. Ethan felt it a second later through the ground before he heard anything at all. A faint vibration, deep and irregular, too heavy to belong to wind. Nia felt it too. Her head rose from Ethan's shoulder, ears widening. Somewhere beyond the glare, something large was coming back, At first, it was only a tremor, so faint it might have been mistaken for the pulse in Ethan's own body. Then it came again, stronger this time, traveling up through the baked earth and into bone. Naya lifted her head sharply from his shoulder. Her ears opened wide. Every crow in the acacias went still at once, as if the entire wash had suddenly turned to listen in the same direction. Moses was the first to stand fully upright. He did not need binoculars now. He knew that rhythm, the deep, rolling impact of multiple elephants moving fast with purpose. "They're coming back," he said, and even in a low voice, the words carried a charge that changed the air. Lena's hand flew to Ethan, then stopped halfway, suspended between warning him and not daring to break the stillness that Nia had only just found. The horizon above, the thorn scrub shimmered with heat, then broke. Large gray shapes began to form through the wavering light, one after another, as if the land itself were giving them back. At the front of the line came Ruby. Even at a distance, she looked different from the others. Her stride was longer, sharper, not quite a run, and not anything close to a walk. The urgency in her body was unmistakable. Nia knew before the humans could be certain. A sound escaped her then, not the raw, ragged cry from the wash, but something thinner and more searching, a calf's voice catching on the edge of recognition. She stepped away from Ethan and froze, too overwhelmed to go farther. Her trunk lifted high, tasting the hot air. Behind Ruby, the rest of the herd fanned out through the glare. Adult cows, juveniles, smaller calves pressed between them. Lena backed up one step, then another. "He has to move," she whispered. "Ethan, you have to move now." But Ethan did not stand. He had seen enough wild mothers to know that sudden motion at the wrong time could turn tension into attack. If he ran, Ruby would read the movement before she read the scene. If he reached for Naya, he would make himself part of the problem. The only chance left was to become less threatening than fear itself. He lowered his eyes and stayed where he was, one hand open against the dust. Nia shifted closer again, not leaning now, but remaining near enough that Ruby would see the connection. Moses moved to Lena's side and caught her wrist before she could step into the wash. "No," he said quietly. "Not now." She looked at him with panic rising in her face, but the certainty in his grip held her where she stood. Ruby covered the distance with terrifying speed. The closer she came, the more immense she seemed, her ears spread wide, trunk raised, the muscles in her shoulders rolling under a skin patterned with dust and old scars. She was not charging in blind rage. That would have been easier to understand. She was coming in focused, deliberate, fully prepared to decide what belonged near her calf and what did not. By the time she reached the wash, the ground itself seemed to pulse with her final strides. She stopped so abruptly that dust lifted around her feet in a pale burst. Nia answered with a small, broken sound and half-stepped toward her, then faltered, caught between instinct and the strange calm she had built beside Ethan. Ruby's trunk rose higher, sampling every scent in the wash, the mud, the blood, the heat, the humans, and most of all, her calf. For one stretched second, nobody breathed. Then Ruby took another step forward. Her front foot landed close enough to Ethan that dust brushed his boot. He could see every crease around her eyes now, every crack in the dry mud on her legs, every twitch of her trunk tip as it tested the air in quick, precise motions. He kept his head bowed, not in submission exactly, but in restraint. He did not offer a challenge. He did not ask for trust. He waited for whatever judgment would come. Nia moved first. Her trunk reached toward Ruby, trembling with need, and the sight of that small gesture seemed to split the moment open. Ruby answered immediately, lowering her trunk to run it along Nia's spine, over the scraped shoulder, down the mud-streaked forelegs. She was reading the entire story through touch. The panic, the fall, the struggle, the foreign scent. Then, slowly, that same trunk lifted away from the calf and turned toward Ethan. Lena's breath caught hard enough that Moses heard it. Ruby's trunk hovered inches from Ethan's head, then brushed across his hair with astonishing delicacy. Not a shove, not a blow. Just contact, a test, a question asked in a language none of the humans could fully enter. Ethan stayed perfectly still, every muscle screaming at him to flinch. He did not. The trunk moved down once over his shoulder, then withdrew. Behind Ruby, the herd had reached the wash and formed a rough crescent, not scattered in confusion, but arranged in silent support. One older cow stepped forward with ears half spread, watching Ethan with hard, unreadable attention. Another juvenile shifted closer to Nia and stopped. The crows, who had owned the sky all morning, were suddenly irrelevant, reduced to dark shapes waiting in branches that no longer mattered. Ruby stood there long enough for time to lose its ordinary shape. Then something in her body softened. Not completely, not safely, but enough. Her ears eased from their full extension. She let out a low rumble, too deep for the humans to hear clearly, though Ethan felt it in his chest, like distant thunder. Nia answered at once, pressing forward on unsteady legs, and this time, Ruby did not stop her. That was the moment the balance turned. Not with noise, not with triumph, but with permission. The herd shifted almost as one, closing the space around the calf. One of the older females moved between Ethan and the open sun, throwing a band of shadow across the wash. Ruby remained in front of Nia, immense and watchful, but she did not drive the man away. She had made her decision, and for reasons none of them could have predicted, it was not destruction. The first thing Lena noticed was the shadow. It moved across the wash before the meaning of it fully landed, cool and sudden against the scorched clay. One of the older cows had stepped to the side just enough to block the worst of the noon sun, and in doing so, she cast that narrow strip of mercy over both Nia and the man who had stayed beside her. It was such a small gesture, and yet it felt impossible. Ethan understood it the same way he understood silence in the field, not as emptiness, but as intention. He did not mistake it for affection. Wild elephants did not hand out human comforts, but the herd was no longer treating him as an active threat. In that moment, beneath the shade of a stranger's body, he was being tolerated inside a space that should have been closed to him. It was more than he had any right to expect. Ruby turned back to Nia and touched her again, slower this time. Her trunk moved over the calf's head, down the soft edge of one ear, then under her chin in a sweeping, searching motion that looked almost tender, until one remembered how much information elephants gathered through touch. Nia leaned into it immediately. The frantic confusion that had ruled her all morning seemed to loosen all at once in the presence of that familiar body. The other females came in closer, not crowding, but closing ranks with the quiet discipline of a family that had practiced protection over generations. A juvenile calf peeked from behind one cow's foreleg, watching Nia with wide curiosity before being nudged back by an older ant. Moses, still standing beside Lena at the wash's rim, let out a breath so slowly it was almost reverent. Even he had not expected the reunion to open this cleanly. Ruby gave a low rumble again, and this time the response rolled through the herd in waves. Bodies shifted, heads turned. A path formed without any obvious signal to the human eye. Naya took one hesitant step, then another, and moved directly beneath her mother's chest. Ruby lowered her head and drew the calf into the safe architecture of her front legs, then farther still, until Naya disappeared under the long shadow of her body, where no crow, no heat, no watching eye could reach her the same way again. Only then did Ethan begin to move. He did it carefully, the way one might back out of a sacred place without wanting to break whatever had allowed him in. First, one hand pressed against the ground, then the other. He shifted his weight, rose into a crouch, and paused there. Ruby watched every inch of it. So did the older females. But no one lunged. No one pinned their ears. The space between species held, fragile but intact. Lena looked ready to collapse from holding herself still. Her camera hung forgotten against her side. She had come to document a story, maybe even to force it forward through the urgency of action. Instead, she was witnessing something no footage could fully explain. An animal world making room for a human, not because he had conquered anything, but because he had known when to stop trying. It unsettled her in the best way, like truth often did. Ethan took one step backward, then another. Dust whispered under his boots. By the time he reached the lower bank of the wash, Naya was no longer looking for him. That, more than anything, told him the calf was coming back to herself. Her trunk was tucked close to Ruby's leg now, touching the older elephant every few seconds, as if to reassure her own body that the contact was real. She had found the point she had been trying to return to all along. The crows gave up the scene almost at once. One launched first from the acacia branch, then another, then the rest in a loose, uninterested drift toward another section of the plain. They had not caused the crisis, and they had no reason to remain once the shape of it changed. Lena watched them go and felt her understanding shift with them. The birds were not villains. They were witnesses to weakness, opportunists in the oldest economy on Earth. And now the opportunity was gone. Moses climbed down just far enough to touch Ethan's shoulder once, hard and brief, the kind of gratitude that would have sounded wrong in words. "You gave her time," he said. Ethan looked back at the herd, where Naya was almost invisible now among the adults, and shook his head lightly. "She found her mother," he said. But even as he spoke, he knew that was not the whole truth. Something had happened in the wash before Ruby arrived, and all three of them had felt it. They stayed where they were until the herd began to move. It happened slowly at first, as if no single elephant wanted to be the one to break the circle. Then Ruby stepped forward, and the others flowed with her. The line reformed around Nia in a living corridor of gray bodies. Every few steps, Ruby's trunk dipped beneath her own chest to touch the calf again. Not because Nia would wander this time, but because reunion itself needed repetition before the morning could be believed. The elephants headed northeast, toward a seasonal water source Moses knew still held enough for a family group to recover. Their pace was measured now, no longer the hard-driven urgency of the return. As they moved into the wavering light, the shape of the herd changed from individual bodies back into one ancient intelligence spread across many forms. Lena finally lifted her camera, but did not press record. Some endings asked to be witnessed before they were ever turned into images. By the time the last of them disappeared beyond the acacias, the wash felt strangely empty, like a stage after music had stopped. Ethan stood with dust on his knees and dried mud on one sleeve, staring at the place where Nia had leaned against, him as if the heat itself had briefly taken on a heartbeat. He did not speak for a long time. Neither did Lena. The silence among the three humans now was not helplessness. It was understanding, arriving slowly. 5 weeks later, they found the herd again near a deeper waterhole in the northern sector, where the ground held green longer than the open plains. Naya was there among the calves, easy to spot once Ethan knew what to look for. The slight scrape scar on one shoulder, the oversized ears, the quick, eager way she moved when another youngster invited her into play. She looked stronger, brighter, almost improbably whole. Ruby stood nearby in the shallows, water shining along her back, and on Ruby's shoulder sat a pied crow. It pecked gently at old skin and parasites, while the great elephant tolerated it without concern, as if the same species that had once gathered over her daughter in the language of death could also belong to the ordinary maintenance of life. Lena stared through the lens, then lowered it with a slow, stunned smile. Context had rewritten everything. The world had not turned kind. It had simply revealed itself as more complicated than fear made it seem. That evening, back at camp, Ethan logged the sighting in his field notes with the usual details. First, date, location, herd composition, calf recovery, normal social reintegration. Then he sat for a while with the pen resting in his hand. Finally, he added one line beneath the rest, a sentence too personal for science and too true to leave out. She didn't need someone to lead her out. She needed someone still enough for her to find the way back. If this story moved you, drop a 1 in the comments for Nia. And if you believe sometimes the greatest help is simply staying, leave a stay below. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and come back for the next story. Because out there in the wild, there is always another moment no one sees coming until it changes everything.